Welcome to Bridging Foundations for a Livable Future. A very special welcome to you, Peter Senge and Gunter Pauli, for being here today. Bridging Foundations for a Livable Future is a project that gave birth during lockdown when we were seeing a health crisis unfold and how one pandemic was having an impact all across the world. We were seeing how people were responding in solidarity and creativity. And today, more and more, we also see other impacts, social impacts on so many livelihoods and businesses, and economical impact and ecological impact. There is a lot of interconnectedness. So today, as we live in a time of transformation and a lot of change implies choices as well. What we wanted to do is offer a way of better understanding what is happening to each and every one of us so that we can also understand what we can do about it as human beings. Bridging Foundations for a Livable Future brings people together in open conversation to cross-pollinate ideas, share insights that lead to action. So once again, very special welcome to you, Peter Senge, Gunter Pauli, for being here.
Well, great to have Peter here. I mean, Peter, the last time was in Sweden, I think, and this is more than a decade ago.
It was a decade ago at Talberg, that's right.
Yeah, that's right.
The two gentlemen haven't had the opportunity to meet in at least 10 years. So today we're catching up and hearing their expertise and their insights about today's world, about the importance of curiosity and learning, and why the children in our society are so important. What I would like to ask both of you is trying to understand what is happening. What would you like to convey to us in terms of, trying to understand what has really happened in the last couple of months? What is the situation the world is now in transformation, and what are the best messages to really understand this the situation current now, so that we can then later, of course, look at what to do from it?
Let's be clear. It's the first time in history that we have a common enemy, and the first thing we do is immobilize everyone. I mean, that has never happened. I mean, this is a remarkable policy decision. Put a stop to everything, whereas there is an enemy on the outside. Second, though, we're living the best proof of how disconnected people have become from the environment. And third, how isolated we look at everything. I mean, the way virologists look at a virus is even worse than a businessman looks at his core business. I mean, they only see one thing, a virus, just like core business only sees their own business. And, if you have to compete in business by being the cheapest in a globalized economy, then the only way you do it is cutting corners on the social side, cutting corners on the environmental side. And if the only thing you see is a virus, and the only thing you want to do is protect people from the virus, then you're demonstrating that you've lost what I would call the context. Now, this is a crisis of civilization. When you have a text, the virus, and you don't see the context, then everything you're doing is a pretext. And we're living in the world of pretexts. That means that the pandemic we're living today, I was 3 months confined in Colombia and was only able to leave about 10 days ago. But the pandemic in Colombia is suicide. Suicide amongst young people between 16 and 26. Because when you create artificially a 95% unemployment because you want to kill a virus, then people start killing themselves. And the total disconnect of the system is what we're living today. Business was doing that, and Peter has been working so hard in trying to secure that business sees the system around their business operations. But boy, Peter, we're going to have to do some work with virologists and epidemiologists, because they clearly have not understood the web of life. And let me just give you a few small numbers. Our DNA is made up of, amongst others, viruses. Some scientists say 20-25% of our DNA is viral DNA. Our body is 47% microorganisms. And every day, there are 100 million viruses descending from the air on every square meter on Earth. So how is it possible we can now build up a defense mechanism against this common virus, the COVID, by measuring distance between two people? So I think the crisis today is a crisis of lacking systemic view, lacking the context, and being so obsessed with one issue that you're ready to basically kill off everything else. And you're even today, I mean, we have a lot of fake news, but the worst is we have the prohibition to distribute the news on suicide pandemic that is ongoing in the world today.
Gunter, you've mentioned the web of life. You've mentioned the lack of that connectivity and obsessed that we have now on this one thing. Could you perhaps explain a little bit more what is the web of life for you? You mentioned it in your I think in the most recent blog as well on your website.
Well, the web of life comes from Fritjof Capra. I mean, it's Fritjof who wrote an extraordinary book about the web of life. Is this amazing interconnectedness of everything with feedback loops and multiplier effects and pattern recognitions. And, you know, it is this life is not about just eating and sleeping. This life is being connected with your environment. And as our environment is changing, we have to change. And this capacity to understand in the first place that we are part of nature and we are part of a system that is much more, where the purpose is not efficiency, but resilience. And when you have a crisis like the pandemic today with the virus or the pandemic of the suicide, then we are lacking the capacity to see how that fits within life. And that is where I think we're going to need a transformation. The future is going to be about resilience, not about efficiency, but that is what nature has been doing all the way through. Nature has always been ready to bounce back when the worst happens. It's been designed to bounce back. And when it happens in nature, everyone is mobilized and everyone contributes to the best of their abilities.
Yes, and in a systems view of life, you also have this amazing situation where you can sometimes get more out of the system than what you put in.
No.
I think that
the
is
system is non-linear. 1 + 1 is always minimum 5, and 2 multiplied by 2 is minimum 17. You know, you will always have more because you have what economists will call the multiplier. You cascade nutrients, you cascade energy. It is never a cause and effect, input, output solely. That is the power of the web of life. And having had a great teacher like Fritjof helps me to grasp it, well, I think for the rest of my life.
And the rest of people's lives. Peter, you talk a lot of interconnectedness and your work with organizations. Please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I know that since Fritjof has come up, and I know we were doing a session together about a month ago, and that text and some of that recording I think is now available here. And he had a very interesting take on the pandemic. He said, you know, this is Gaia's response to the imbalances that humans keep generating and seem to be incapable of recognizing, certainly incapable at a scale that matters of correcting. And so, you know, at the kind of very tangible level of reducing natural habitat and increasing the incidence of viruses jumping from the from the wild animal kingdom to the human. And then, of course, the way we've, from an epidemiological standpoint, increased the risk and increased the transmission through the density of population and the travel and all that. But those are more the kind of technical artifacts. I think these deeper issues are, I think probably Gunter and I have maybe slightly different ways of articulating them, but probably not much of a difference in what we see. In the last 5 years or so, we've just started to anchor on this term profound interconnectedness and using it to mean that there's really two fundamental levels of interconnectedness. There's, in some sense, what science has been helping us understand for a long, long time, which is, no one's in control of a forest controls a forest. Every place where life arises, there's this incredible web of interconnectedness. But then there's the interconnectedness that people like Humberto have also been helping us understand. We are not observers. There's no observer sitting outside the system. That system is not out there, it's out there and in here, because we're not simple recording devices. We're living systems who are interacting in this larger web of life and bringing forth something called awareness. And that itself is an interconnected phenomenon in the sense that there's no such thing as a separate observer. And that's always been the kind of cornerstone in many ways from an epistemological standpoint of Western science, is you can observe it out there. That cornerstone started to look a lot less robust starting, 100 years ago in physics, right? That, more and more evidence that there's no such thing as the ability to observe without interacting. But as most physicists would tell you, we may understand it from a few experiments. We may talk about it maybe in every textbook on contemporary physics, but doesn't mean we know how to live it. We still live our lives mostly as naive realists, a term that you'll find in philosophy of language. Basically means someone who thinks what they see is, as if there is something external to us that we're observing as a separate observer. So somehow that's the cultural dilemma here. And we've started to use this term profound interdependence, particularly in all of our work in education, because most of the work in the last 20 years, increasingly for me in the last 10 years, has been now focused more and more on primary and secondary education, because I cannot imagine, I don't think it's sufficient, but I cannot imagine us kind of gradually finding a way out of this profound cultural impasse we find ourselves in without in part at least really paying a lot more attention to how do we conceive of the development of a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 15-year-old. Education is the institution through which all societies transmit their values, basically, right? And it's complete mess. So the idea that there is no such thing as separateness, to me, is the kind of cultural imperative. And I think it can seem almost impossible to reconcile or to transcend that when you really see how our present culture operates. But there's been plenty of examples. This kind of notion that I'm now saying in terms of profound interconnectedness has been a cornerstone of other cultures, particularly a lot of native cultures. Not all. A lot of native cultures don't last, but some do. Some last for tens of thousands of years. And this intimate interaction of whatever we call this thing, this mind-body-heart system, and this larger phenomenon called the universe, is really the cornerstone of the education system. And we see it in lots of instances, even Western culture. There are these periods where you can see in the last 200 years times when the group is, no. We really have to transcend this apparent separateness, because it's an illusion. It's a social construct and can't stand up to any sort of serious scrutiny. So that's, when I think of the web of life, that's what I think of. The web of life is not just an external phenomenon that we characterize as the way the universe or a forest or whatever works. We're it. We cannot talk seriously about the web of life without reflecting on who are we as living phenomenon or living systems.
So what can the web of life teach us today? To kids, perhaps, but also to the rest of us, to citizens that are, questioning so much with so much transformation happening today. So what can the web of life teach the day-to-day person?
I would start with just, a good critical look at the predicaments we're in. I remember years ago, we always ask our students to write reflective papers. And I'll never forget, it was a long time, it was 15 years ago, a student wrote, we're more connected and more separate than ever before in human history. So this notion that we're all connected is really not much there. There's not a very valid notion if it's not experienced. So we have to start by recognizing, and Gunter said this, that how profoundly disconnected we've become, and really telling the truth about that, and what it feels like. So all of our education work, we've kind of anchored in a bit of a paradoxical phrase of compassionate systems, because we're trying to kind of help us recognize we have to hold these two phenomena. The systems worldview, as we understand science, does have its roots epistemologically in a positivist, view of the external reality. And as I said, but it simply hasn't connected in a very deeply reflective way to what it means to really develop the feeling connection. The word compassion simply means to feel with another. It's different than empathy. Empathy comes from einfühlen in German, it's feel into. And empathy, you can get overwhelmed by another's feelings. But compassion is a notion that you feel the other's feelings and you feel you're not the other. You don't get sucked in. You can stand on your own 2 feet. This is why it's such a core practice of so many traditions, religious traditions like Buddhism, that how to feel the feelings of another, but from a stance where you can always be holding your intention for the well-being of the other. And that's your intention. So there's self and other held in harmony, not just being lost in the emotions of another. So those are really critical capabilities, and they can really be nurtured in concert with the intellectual, conceptual understanding of interdependence. And that's an example of this, what I was calling profound interdependence.
Gunter, how do you feel about this?
Well, let's be very clear. There was a very wise French writer living in Morocco, living between the Sahara and the Atlantic. And he found some meteorites in the desert. And when he realized he had meteorites in between 2 deserts, the key message that he wrote in his book, which is one of the most translated books in the world today, Le Petit Prince, The Little Prince, is you have to see with your heart. And somehow in these few words, the fox said it all. You have to see with your heart. And you can only have a virologist looking at viruses only and totally neglect the suicide pandemic when you only have dissociated yourself from society. It's the only way. Because as Peter was saying, there's the world out there and there's the world here. But if the world out there is so separate from you that you can't even feel, and you even want to neglect the statistics, and you even suppress the statistics from being distributed, then we have disconnect that becomes dangerous. And to me, this is really part of the risk in society, is that we are going towards a new fascism. A new fascism where a few experts decide, because they have decided that this is the truth and nothing but the truth. And I think this is where we really have to wake up. And how do we wake up? Well, I always say that the wealth that I have accumulated in my life is the fact that I can communicate in 7 languages, because every language became a new world. When I work in China with children and I present to the Chinese kids my fables, and I explain to them that really plants, they can sing, you know, and I show them with apparatus that the plants are singing and the plants are reacting to the emotions of the kids coming close. And some plants just don't like you so much. And some strawberries just like you very much. And there is no doubt about it, the plant sings differently. When a child loves this strawberry because listen to how it's singing, then we take the children to the next level and we show them how the 40 languages of the whales are now being snooped into. I mean, we can now listen to 40 languages of whales. And the whale language in the Pacific is different from the Indian Ocean. And when I then ask children, would you like to learn French, Spanish, English, or whale language? What do you think the kids will want to know? Whale language. Because they want to connect with that world. They feel that they can connect with anyone now through Google Translate. That's not an issue anymore. But Google Translate is not taking care of the language with the whales. And so children have this innate feeling of being part. And in order to be part and continue to be connected, you need to speak the language. You need to listen to the language. You need to recognize the language. You know, one of the first things you do is you recognize, oh, this is the whale language from the Indian Ocean. Oh, and that's the Pacific whale language. And you know, when kids, I show these audios, I let them listen to it, those kids are connected to the whales for the rest of their life.
Wow.
We are not listening anymore. And so the disconnect we're having with this danger that the disconnect is leading to a new fascism, a new dictatorship, that is where the best response is. We learn to listen to the sounds of the web of life.
I have a good friend who's been taking people into deep experiences in the natural world for his whole life. He's a kind of American Taoist master who's been identifying sacred sites and protecting them for a long time. And he tells the story of taking 5-year-olds into one of the sacred sites. He said, one of the first questions he said, they looked around and said, is it okay if we talk to the trees? And he says, well, of course it's okay if you talk to the trees. It's such a natural impulse. But of course, every signal they get from our fragmented, disconnected culture is, well, no, you don't talk to the trees. They're just trees. You know, for the Blackfoot Indians, they always use the phrase, the best translation would be tree people and stone people and fish people. Just that simple gesture of adding people is because there's this intimate relationship. So you call them people as a way of signifying that intimacy. And it's a natural for children. That's beautiful. I'd love to learn more about how you're doing that, because I couldn't agree with you more. And that's, again, why we've got to go to the children.
I fully agree with you, Peter. I mean, the children have this innate capacity to communicate. You know, children will talk to each other not by words, but by games, by playing. They will immediately invent games. And even if they have nothing, they will invent games, even when you didn't decide on the rules. And so we need to bring that connectedness back to our societies. And we need to be able to navigate. I always say that we have to stop thinking we are the waves. We are surfers. I mean, we need to learn how to surf again. And surfing means that you recognize the waves underneath your feet and the waves in the air and the cosmic waves. You sense the waves and you go with the waves that will respond to your innate desires, innate capabilities. And so I think that the children need to be inspired to the point that they will keep on discovering these incredible innate capabilities, and one of them is indeed is sing with the plants. And one of them, of course, is speak the language of the whales. You know, the whales have 40 syllables. I mean, it's not just any language, not just, you know, they're calling for a female, because that's then the simplistic scientific explanation is, oh, the male is calling for a female. Well, no, this is not at all what they're doing. We have this Freudian slip every time that we think everything is in the end about sex. It is not. It's about taking care of the kids. It's about protecting against the predator. It's about securing food. You know, these are the very basic things in communication. So I think I want to tell the little anecdote. I would like to tell the little anecdote of Paulo Freire. You know, I mean, I had never been able to understand that Paulo Freire could teach in shanty towns in Rio de Janeiro. He could teach people to read and write in 2 weeks. Now, I don't know about you, Peter, but I had a good education, but I didn't do it in 2 weeks. I mean, I needed 9 months. And with a good Jesuit education, I needed 9 months to be able to read and write. And Paulo Freire does it in 2 weeks. Now, do we really need the Khan Academy now? Or do we need Paulo Freire's? We need Paulo Freire's, because it doesn't make sense to make people go through a lot of difficult mind massaging. We need to bring the best out of you that is already in there. We have been gifted. I mean, the beauty is that we're always saying we've been gifted. Well, we've been so gifted, but we won't get even a chance to discover it.
Yeah, I think it's the essence of all real learning. My favorite definition of learning, many years ago, a kind of an eminent accounting guy. It was funny, but he was a really thoughtful guy, very deep thinker. He said, learning is the process of discovering and embodying nature's patterns. Such a beautiful definition of learning. Learning is the process of discovering and embodying nature's patterns. So there's something so deep in the process that really is about just honoring and cultivating and elaborating our connectedness.
And Václav Havel said, learning is seeing connections you didn't see before and remembering them.
Yeah. And enacting them.
Yeah. I think this is really where we need to overcome this present immobilization of the whole society in the name of one purpose. We need to overcome it by inspiring what is in us. And inspiring in us is the capacity to listen in so many different languages, provided we do it the way that Saint-Exupéry said, your heart. And that is what Maturana is saying, you know, it's the love, it's the heart. And there is this innate love always present, but we don't give it a chance anymore, because now the kids are 3 and 4 are already pushed by their parents to read and write. I mean, how could you ever do that? Let that gaming come out.
Right.
And then if we do get to gaming, then it's of course video gaming, where the only thing we learn is raping points by killing someone else. So we have to come back to that connectedness and that reality, but also we need to then see how that intelligence of being connected can be related to action. Because let me be very clear, if we don't start acting very soon, if we don't translate what we learn through this web of life into transforming what we have before us, then we're going to read great books for decades to come, but we're not going to make any transformation happen. And this is where the new learning is coming to. How do we get kids to act way before their parents even have understood that there is time to act?
Well, parents are definitely a problem, right? Because they're going to embody and transmit and just keep reinforcing the same kind of fragmented worldview that they grew up with. I had the good fortune about 15 years ago, 12 years ago, I had a teacher in China, so I used to spend a lot of time there. And he started a school. And the school was the first school sanctioned by the party, Communist Party, based on kind of the cornerstones of education 2,000 years ago. And the only reason he had the permission is he was a very eminent teacher, very respected. And so he could do this. And it was fascinating. That's where the calligraphy picture come from. This the picture I mentioned earlier, that this young girl just concentrating on doing calligraphy, because calligraphy was one of the cornerstones of the Chinese education system for children. And so there was calligraphy, there was recitation, which is literally chanting together. It was considered the foundation of social harmony. As you grew up chanting together, closest thing we would have as Westerners would be like singing together, but literally that vibratory embodied experience of togetherness. And of course you're chanting the classics. So, you're getting these seeds of real traditional wisdom that, you may discover when you're 40 years old. The meaning is secondary, really secondary. And then they had, of course, Tai Chi. And so you're kind of really getting connected to the mind, body, heart system. Well, all of this really makes sense because, in the traditional, the oldest symbol in the Chinese language for mind is actually a drawing of the heart. The idea that intelligence or understanding is centered here is very Western. But in these older cultures, understanding is literally physically centered in heart knowledge. Heart and the lower dantian, so the body heart system, and the mind, the intellect has important function, but they never started any serious analytic intellectual work until they were at least 8 or 9 years old. And oh, by the way, the other thing they did is played all the time. They were always playing. They were always climbing trees. They were doing what 5 and 6 year olds would do naturally, right? As you say, they play and climb trees and run around and make a lot of noise. And it was so wonderful. I'll never forget the very first time they brought the parents together, because the parents, of course, are very antsy about this. They only were willing to trust their kids because this teacher had such stature. But anyhow, they bring the parents in for the first parent meeting, and they had a lot of scholarship kids, so some of the parents had to travel all around China. Anyhow, I'll never forget. So the kids are doing a Tai Chi demonstration in 40 kids of the initial cohort of the school. And they're 5 and 6 years old. And they're doing their Tai Chi, and the parents are all sitting there. And then one little boy in the front, he's crossing his legs, and then he runs off the stage. And as he runs, he goes, "Gotta pee, first things first." And everybody just laughed. It was a perfect moment when you were just accepting the way things are naturally are the way things that are. And we can create a space where when the little boy has to pee, no one thinks the thing, everybody just thinks, well, of course. I mean, the utter simplicity of it was what I really was struck by. It was kids being kids. And the founding chairperson of the school, who was one of the more advanced students of this teacher, I'll never forget her speech to the parents. Her speech to the parents started off by saying, "You'll notice nothing very unusual occurs at this school. You'll notice nothing very unusual occurs at this school." So I think there's a trust, a deep trust we have to kind of refine it. Nature has spent a few million years working on the organism. The organism has plenty of ability if we stop trying to program the goddamn thing, or even worse, by negligence, create programs that program it.
Gunter, you state on your website something that I put here. You say that your greatest wish is that all children consider their life as a dream to be realized. And you also have said several times the importance of being able to allow children to be better than what we could ever be. This is at the heart of what is being said today. What else would you like to convey, as the final words, and then...
Camila, life is realizing dreams, and it's always going through difficult times, and we have to have children ready for never giving up the dream, to never stop dreaming. I mean, what I think with this over-rationalization of education for meeting all the standards that somewhere someone has decided you have to meet, we really kick all the dreaming out of the kids. And so to me, the most important is that kids are nurturing the capacity to dream. But dreaming is not just a wild dream. Dreaming is taking stock of the signs, but the signs the parents could not imagine. You know, Camila, my favorite question to parents when I am anywhere in the world with teacher and parents is, how did the apple get up in the tree? Please, could you please tell me what are the 7 laws of physics that permit the apple to go against the law of gravity? And it's amazing. No one can answer. And they go on Google, and Google doesn't know it either. And so I have been saying this now for 20 years, and there's still no website that very easily explains how the apple gets up in the tree. Now, let me tell you, for a kid, this is amazing. How come my parents does not know how the apple gets up in the tree? They only know the easy stuff. Or the very simple question to build on the whale story. I mean, how does the whale pump 1,000 liters with 1 heartbeat, only using 6-volt direct current, DC? I mean, you go to any engineer and will say, that's not possible. And every kid will say, but there are millions of whales in the ocean doing this for 80 years without a backup battery. And I think bringing this to children allows them to grasp that science, whatever we pretend with peer group reviewed articles, science is nowhere. Scientists cannot explain how the apple goes up and how the heart of the whale pumps 1,000 liters. But the children also have this innate capability of the emotional intelligence. And when you have a dream, dreams are connected with emotions. When a child hears about the whale and the beating of the heart and 1,000 liters, if the emotional experience has been a father or a grandfather with a heart attack, the child will immediately be listening carefully to what it could derive to understand what happened to my father or my grandfather. The emotional experience we carry within all our life is going to be connected to the signs. But you cannot expect the child to express what it's then dreaming with an essay. I mean, when I was working in New Mexico, we asked the Hispanics, to do rapping in English and in Spanish. Do it with a rap. I mean, and it's amazing. They rap so well. I mean, they grasp it like no one else. But don't ask them to do it in an essay. English kills dreams. Sorry for those who have English as a native language. English language is a dream-killing language. Spanish, as we know, is already much more emotional, much more communicative. But we need to have that capacity and that freedom for the children to express what they've learned and what they dream and how they want to go for their dream through arts. But the arts will immediately put them through a connectivity, because art is never an expression on your own. I mean, most kids don't think they're Picasso. Most kids will think they're part of an orchestra. I mean, they're playing something in part of a team, because the dreams are never realized alone. And this is where we are now shifting, I think, particularly with our educational programs in China. We're shifting to receiving the freedom to act. You know, this is what is bothering me with the present crisis. We are told not to do anything. We're told to go home and connect to Netflix and Zoom. And it is quite amazing that when you're not permitted to act, like go for exercises every day, at least 1 or 2 hours to build up your immune system, or to ensure that you have your 1 hour of sunshine or light to get your vitamin D reserves up, etc. I mean, we need to let the children experience the action, and the action like climbing up the tree, or the action like doing so much that we know. But to me, the key is, I call that the 5 intelligences. It's the science, it's the emotion, it's the arts, it's the connectivity, and the action. We need to have that action fit into a big dream. Big dreams which are nurtured and which has the right to be changed. The power of dreams is that once you go for your dreams, you may even go beyond your dreams. You will have to go through a few nightmares though, And this is where we come into the action through resilience and not efficiency. Action through resilience and not efficiency means that you're not trying to squeeze the most out of the least. No, you're trying to secure that network, that web of life around you is the most resilient, because if you are very resilient, then you can take a big hit and still go for your dream. If you only have one leg to stand on and you get hit, you fall over. You stand on two, you're stronger. You are a team of people in the rugby, no one pushes you over. And I think this is where we have lost the sight of the intelligence. You know, it's interesting that you mentioned the permission, Peter, that was given in China to this school. In Russia, there is another school that got the permission, not from the Communist Party because it's gone there, but from Mr. Putin. And it's a school where every child, first of all, learns martial arts. Martial arts. Second, every child does geometry and mathematics. But starting with geometry, feeling the geometry, understanding geometry, and we know pattern recognition without geometry just doesn't work. So you make certain the children feel the geometry, and then every child learns a classical instrument. So it's music, martial arts, geometry. And that school is now becoming the Harvard of, not the Harvard at university level, but it's like the school where people would like to go to. But we have another extraordinary school, which is the Green School of Bali, where kids come into the school and they have a building without windows. I mean, can you imagine? Isn't this more symbolic, Peter? Have you been there to the Green School in Bali?
Yeah, I've not been there, but I know quite a few people who've been involved.
So the beauty of it is that, you know, you have a school without windows and there are always several entrances. Isn't this very symbolic? Instead of having one entrance and everything is hermetically closed in order to save energy, we now have a system. You have the Lagerberg School in Sweden, which is a school also that will refresh the air summer and winter. Every 30 minutes, all air is fresh. And you have plants on the top of just under the ceiling, so the oxygen can drop down, you know, and the CO2 can go up. And of course, there's so many things that we can do to ensure that children not only hang on to their dreams, but nurture their dreams, discover their innate capabilities, and then in life, go beyond them. And then you will change society.
Gunter, you're talking of children living their dreams. I claim that also adults are capable of reconnecting to the dreams that they may have forgotten. And that is a wish that I give to so many people and so many people that surround me today. You know, I edited this book that is Your Fables. You may have written many, many more fables since. How many fables are there now?
Oh, I finished my target objective. My life objective was to do 365 fables. I finished them about 3 weeks ago. And so I have now a fable for every day. And my dear Katerina is busy illustrating them. But you know, you touched upon something important, Camila. We have to keep the child in us alive. We don't have to just go back to our dreams that we had. We have to keep the little child that is in all of us alive and kicking, because the kicking is key. Being alive is indeed kicking as well. So my view is that when I say children, it includes those young at heart who keep the child in them alive.
Thank you, Gunter. I'm keeping an eye on the time. Basically, what I'm saying is that I thank you very much for your time.
Yeah. No.
But go maybe, the family.
Peter, you have maybe some final comment. I don't want to miss it.
Well, there's an old saying in traditional Chinese culture that the mark of every golden age is the children are the most important members of the society. and teaching the most revered profession. And I've always thought the logic of that is so evident. You know, when the children are the most important part of a society, in the center of society, several things happen automatically. One is that innate curiosity and love of life, that unquenchable. You don't teach a child to dream. It just happens. You can do a lot to suppress it, and of course we do. So that you're always staying connected to it. The interplay of the adults, and particularly across generations, the grandparents and the kids, it's the heart of all culture, because it's continually regenerating, tapping that life wisdom of children. There's a wonderful society in Sweden, which is called the Society for the Preservation of the Life Wisdom of Children. And the one other thing, of course, it does is it keeps us connected to the future. I mean, a common struggle we have all struggled with. Every systems person I've ever known who's evolved in practical problems and policy and inventions, you always struggle with the extraordinary foreshortening of time horizons, right? How do we get ourselves committed to the future? And of course, because most of us are trained to science, we try to solve that problem through rationality by convincing people, here's what's going to happen if you don't. It's a very low leverage strategy. When you hang out with a 5-year-old, you are connected to the future. In the only way connection really matters, you feel your natural responsibility for their well-being. So you feel the future. So I've always thought that's a touchstone for all of us. We once again must realize the mark of every golden age is that children are the most important members of a society for all of us. Thanks, Gunter. It's wonderful to hear the work you're doing. I have a lot to get caught up on. I will start working on it right away.
Well, thank you so much. And Peter, I have been very privileged, and I do not know why I deserved it, but the Chinese government has adopted all my fables in all their schools. And why? I never made a proposal. I never proposed them to do that. But I've now worked with 35,000 teachers in China, basically inspiring them as I try to inspire the children. I have always gone back again to the good old principles that if you want to build the greatest boat, don't teach them how to build the boat. Talk to them about the grand voyages, and the best boat will be built. And this is something what I feel the Chinese have very well understood. They're going to be very performant with some high-level schools, but they're going to be extraordinary in giving a freedom to the children to discover what they are and what they can do. I had this amazing situation with the children in China where when I started, we needed translators. And when I was doing model classes, I had these 3 magical simultaneous translators keeping up with me to do the model classes. Peter, 5 years later, no more translators. Kids understand English now. They've kind of decided we're going to learn the language. And why learn the language? Because the motivation was very high. And so the discovery that we're doing with China is that once you give the children this opportunity to connect just for 3 minutes, the story is 3 minutes. If they're connected with 3 minutes, but the question keeps on hanging with them, and there's something that is really very obvious, but when dad doesn't know and mom cannot explain, boy, these kids feel, and of course they are super intelligent. And the parents, when it happens not once or twice or 3 times, but 10, 20, 30 times, they're thinking that the school system has become the best in the world because the kids come home with stories the parents had no clue about. And this environment, we have too much arrogance. If you permit me to just say the negative word, but we have too much arrogance as adults. As adults, we don't listen to anyone. We listen to ourselves, but we have the arrogance not to listen to the genuine interest that children express. We think we know.
And we think our job is to teach them.
And we just have to. So what I think is that the only education system I've learned to know in the world, apart from Bhutan, but the only other educational system where kids are getting an incredible freedom to express themselves beyond whatever we thought of the system is in China.
I'm so glad to hear that, because it's been about 5 years since I was there frequently, and I could see this developing. The interest all around the country in this school, for example, was huge. And part of the real challenge there, it takes a long, long time to overcome the consequences of colonialization. And the Chinese have lived with this extraordinarily bizarre, kind of paradoxical consciousness. On the one hand, they have the inherited, it is arrogance, Han chauvinism, that they were the center of the universe. The fact that they could be overrun and colonized was just unthinkable to them. Then, of course, they go to the incredible depth of feeling profoundly inadequate. If you grow up in a colonial reality, you've got to leave your country to get established because all your standards are not you. And they really know they need to get rid of that, shake that off, and find what their wisdom traditions could look like in today's world. So I'm so pleased to hear that, because I could see that starting to happen. But when he passed away, I stopped making such regular trips. So I've kind of drifted out of that contact. So that is really heartening and not surprising. I met so many amazing people. You could see they were really ready for these next steps. I'm so pleased you've been able to help them.
Well, and I'm very honored they gave me the opportunity, but it's now happening elsewhere as well. I think the consciousness of a small group of people knowing that it's with the kids that we change, and it's not by teaching them, is to liberate them. We have this wonderful French philosopher, young Idriss Aberkan. Have you heard of him? Idriss wrote a book called Libérez votre cerveau. That means, liberate your brain, please. I mean, liberate it. And Camila, Idriss.
Yes, I do.
It is the Edgar Morin of the 21st century. Edgar Morin, and we need to go back to a few grand philosophers about education. But then we need to have armies of people who are going to make it happen.
Oh, yeah.
Because the happening is where we're going to see the transformation. Camila, thank you. Thank you so much, Peter, and delighted to see you, and see you soon again in life.
Definitely sooner than
Okay.
it has been the last time. Thank you.
Thank you, Camila.
Thank you. Thank you, Gunter.
Your initiative to you and your whole team. And, this is really a program dedicated to Umberto Maturana. Huh? This is his love. And I must say that, it is amazing we can still benefit from his personal life, wisdom, and of course, Jimena's. We need the people who can see more than just a virus.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for everything.